Hi again everyone, Carol again. It's a good job I did stop when I did because my battery was down to 10%, so that and the postman called. So yeah, I had the buzzer going as well in the background. Just a quick recap. This is the journal that we're making on this bank holiday weekend, this fabric covered journal. It's a real simple one. Nothing fancy about it at all, and I'll just quickly go through what we've already done in the first part of the video. So basically we got our cereal packet and we put a piece of felt on it and we've put our fabric on. We've glued down the corners and we've glued down the four sides. We've put a piece of Tyvek on it as well, and we've then got our piece of paper which is going to go on the inside, and I've faux stitched this. So basically I've stitched it on the sewing machine, but when I stick that on, no one would then know whether I've stitched it before or after. And I also stitched around the outer edge of the fabric as well. Now, one of the things that I did say that I would cover was the alternatives that you could use for Tyvek, so that if you haven't got any in your own stash, or you can't purchase any at the moment but are intending to get some, there are alternatives that you can use. The reason why we use the Tyvek is just to give the journal cover itself some protection and support. So what you could use as an alternative is masking tape with fluff, apparently. So as you can see, I've got a really wide masking tape here, so that is one of the alternatives. Another one is duct tape. So again, those come in really wide sort of formats as well. And then I've this tape, and I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but it's a sticky tape, just the same as like a masking tape, and it's got like a paperish sort of front on it, so you could use that as well. So it just gives the journal a little bit of support and cover. Now, the difficulty with using these is that if you are going to sew your paper pages to the cover of the journal, what you've got to remember is that as you put your needle and thread through these, it will start to pick up the residue of the glue that is on the back of the tape. When we stick the Tyvek to the card, we attach glue to it, but that glue dries, but it dries so that it remains, the two pieces remain in contact with each other. With these tapes, the glue doesn't dry to be able to keep the two in contact. It still remains sticky, so it does mean that your needle and thread will pick up the residue of the glue that is on the back of these tapes. So that's one of the disadvantages for using those. The other thing that you could use is something like a piece of calico. So you could cut a little strip of calico and glue that in position using the, where's it gone? There we go, using the all-purpose glue again, and that will just give that card just that little bit of extra support. Tyvek is the best option, but if you haven't got Tyvek, then you can use something like this instead, or even a scrap piece of your fabric, but you don't want to use that because that's too nice, isn't it, to use to just stick in there. Anyway, calico will do. Okay, so now we need to assemble the front, the inside, and the two envelopes and the closure. So this is the section that we're going to cover now. Now, I've used the seam binding for my closure on the blue version that I did. I just reach over for it. So I used seam binding on this one. On the fabric one, this was an organza ribbon, so you could use either of those things. I'm using this seam binding here, but there's no reason why you can't use something like raffia or a patterned. This is a patterned organza ribbon. Anything that you've got to hand, really, that you can tie up into a bit of a bow. So that's what I'm going to do first. Now, I've cut these into two separate lengths. Hang on, let me just do a quick measure. So round about just over half, 3/4 of a metre in length I've done, and I've cut one for the left hand side and one for the right hand side. Alright, I'm just going to move this piece of paper out of the way first. So what I tend to do is I fold the ribbon in half, and then the loopy end I'm going to attach to the inside of the cover, and I'm going to do that by just attaching a little bit of glue here and attach a bit on the opposite side. Then I can get rid of my glue for a bit, and then I'm just going to stick the folded edges on top of there, and the glue will seep through. But the other thing that I can do is I can use the likes of my masking tape or micropore, because that's my other favourite go-to paper tape, or even washi tape will do, to just stick it over the top to just hold that in place. Then I get my other piece of seam binding, fold that in half again, and with this loopy end I'm going to attach the loopy end on there, and they're lined up. So there's no point having one up here and one down there. And again, I'm just going to put a little bit of tape over that to make sure that it is secure. Okay, I'm just going to put that to one side for a second. So now I'm going to talk to you about the paper on the inside and the envelopes. So these envelopes, they need to be small enough that when this paper is eventually folded in half, this will be the halfway point. These envelopes do not want to extend beyond the halfway point, because we've yet to put our pages in here as well. So they need to be small enough that they're not extending beyond the height, or you know, the full sort of depth of the page, but they're also not going beyond the halfway point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the flap to the underside of the paper, so that this flap here will be stuck down on the back. Alright, so then when I fold this in half, they're not going to encroach on this area here. So I'm just going to turn this over. I'm going to pull back the flap, and then I'm going to put glue on the flap of this envelope. Excuse me. And then I'm going to just position the flap and the fold on the edge of the paper, and making sure that I've got an equal distance here and here, so that when I turn it over I can fold that in. Okay, turn it over, and I'm now going to do the other side. So pull the flap back, place glue around all of the flap, try and line it up so it's about the same height, and I'm just lining the fold edge of the envelope up with the edge of the card, and making sure that the distance at the top and the bottom is round about the same. So then I can fold that over. It's a little bit lopsided, isn't it? Didn't do that very well, did you, Carol? Let's see if I can move it up a little bit. Just have a look at that. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so now what happens is that when you open your journal, you'll be able to pull these envelopes back, and then you've got the opening of the envelope here so that you can store something inside of there. So now I need to place glue around all of this and stick it onto here. Now, one thing you will need to just think about, if you're using fabric that's directional, in terms of there's a specific pattern where it shows that there's a top and a bottom. So if I just have a look, I don't think it matters really with mine, but if there was a definite that's the top and that's the bottom, and then you were also using paper that was directional, that was the top and that was the bottom, then you need to remember to put the top to the top and the bottom to the bottom. Okay. Okay, so that would then fit on there. All right, so I need to make sure that my ribbons are going to be out of the way, because I don't want those to be stuck on the wrong side. And I'm just going to put glue. At this point you can actually use a different glue, because we're just sticking paper down on top of some of the fabric. But because I've got this glue out, I am just going to use this glue, because I have it to hand and I'm too lazy to reach over for my other glue. Need to make sure that I've got a nice covering, because this is where bubbling can occur, because it's such a large surface area. And I'm also going to put some extra glue down this centre bit, because that's going to stick on the Tyvek, and the Tyvek is sometimes a little bit resistant to glues, and that's why I tend to use the all-purpose when I'm using Tyvek. So I'm now going to just put those ribbons underneath as best I can so that they're out the way, and then place that on top. Try and match my corners up and try and give myself a nice even border all the way round. Now at this point, just bear with me on this, need to grab some. You can use paper clips. Hope you can hear me. Hang on, let me shout that. You can use paper clips. Okay, or you can use these clips here to just make sure specifically around the edge and in the centre that it all stays together. Now I'm going to need more clips. It's that centre bit that I need to make sure that it's got really good contact. Let me just get some more clips. Just talk to yourself a minute, I'm coming back. Okay, there we go, some more clips. I haven't got enough clips to do the other side, so I'm just going to have to keep pushing. There we go. As I say, you just need to make sure that you've got a really good contact. Because when you fold this in half, you don't want your paper lifting off. Now, my advice would be, at this point, to go away and leave it alone, because you will be tempted to try and fold it to see what it's going to look like. And I will do it on mine so that you can see what happens if you do it before the glue is set. Okay, so we'll pretend that you've waited, that you've been good, and you have waited and your glue has set and it's no longer wet. Okay, you then need to find the center point. So we know that this is a 10-inch, or mine is a 10-inch wide journal. Yours might be different, and I know that 5 inches is going to be my center point. Now if you don't have a scoreboard of any kind, you don't actually need one, because what you could do is you could just use your ruler. You could have marked top and bottom and just run your ruler down. With the scoreboard, obviously you've got the measurement already here. The problem is with using the scoreboard is that I've now got all this thickness, so where that would normally run down the ridge, it's not going to do that because of the thickness. But I can use it as my guide for doing it just purely with the bone folder. And I'm just going to lightly run the bone folder up and down the card to indent it, so that when I fold it, it just makes it that little bit easier. Can you see how often I'm just running it up and down? I'm not pressing really hard. Just want to make sure that I've got a nice indentation. Okay, now when I fold it, it should just fold. Now then, if you can, I don't know whether you can see, but can you see, look, the card's just lifting off here because the glue is still wet. See, look, it's just lifted off completely here because it's still wet, and that's why you need to leave it until it's completely dry. So I'm just going to keep pushing mine this way. And I will come back and I will clip mine again. But just so as you can see now, let me just move that scrap pad out of the way. So, do you remember how my fabric was all creased earlier? Because it's now stretched slightly around the journal cover, it's actually pulled out the creases, so you can't see the creases too much. And then obviously I've got my double ribbons here to tie it up when I'm all done and finished. And then when you open it up, if you imagine your pages are going to be in there, and then this will flip back and you've got a pocket in there, and this will flip back and there's a pocket in there. Okay, but as I say, this needs to be clipped and let that dry set. Let that glue dry. Let that glue set, let the glue dry, whatever. Anyway, it needs to dry, but more so around the spine area and the corners than anywhere else. The rest you can just keep pushing and eventually it'll go. But I would be inclined to put that to one side and just let the glue do its job. If you find it still lifting off, I think I've explained this in another video. I tend to use these little bottles with this little nib on. These little nibs are handy for if you've got a little bit of card that's lifting up. You can just put the nib just inside, in between the two layers, and just insert a little bit of glue. So that's where those nibs come in really handy. So I'm just going to pin that for that, like that for now. But that is the basics of the cover. And then I mentioned as